Well, there you are. Welcome back to Through the Decades, the podcast. This series, I'm in Polliesfield in Braintree, Essex, which is an Abbey Fields independent and assisted living development. And this week on the podcast, I'm joined by Graham, who is 81 years young. So, Graham, can you get this episode started by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and a bit about your life?
Yep. I was born in Hackney in the East End of London during the war. The war had been on for about 3-4 years then, and I was don't really remember much about the war, but all I remember is the siren noise. Even today, if I hear a siren, it gives me sort of a funny feeling, and that obviously I think translates because I presume my mother, when the siren went off, she would grab me and rush me down to the shelter, and so it's inherent in you. I went to school when I was 5 because in those days you couldn't start school till you were 5 years old. Went to a primary school, which it was only just up the road, so I used to just walk there. Lunchtime I'd come back home. My mother didn't work because my father was in the City of London Police, and so her job was to look after my dad, so she wasn't allowed to work once they got married. So I always came home for me lunch. Mum had cooked me meals, and then off I go back to school. Then when I got to, I don't know if it was maybe 7 years old, my father sent me off to a private school, which was, I used to have to go on a trolley bus on my own. So 7 years old, on the trolley bus up to, I expect it was a quarter of an hour away. And my father had done the same for my brother, so he was obviously trying to treat us both very similar. I stayed there. It was a bit hard because what happened, I got there and they were using what I call proper ink, whereas I've been using a pencil, and then they were doing proper writing, loop writing. I hadn't got a clue what was going on. And they sat me in this classroom and I just felt like an idiot because I didn't know what was going on. And everybody obviously, because they're private, they'd taught them, Yeah. So it was a bit, I did find it hard. And I stayed there for maybe 2 or 3 years. Then my father took me away because we used to have to do the 11 plus. So my father took me away, went back to the school where I used to go, start again. Then the problem was I was so far ahead of the children there, then I sat there and did nothing all day long. So in a way, though your parents think they're doing the best for you, when you yourself look back, you think it wasn't really the right thing to do. But obviously, all parents try to do the best for their children. So they took me back, and they had 2 classes of, say, the year or age I was then. So one was the ones not so bright, maybe, and then you had the ones who were the brighter ones who were going to generally go off to grammar school. So I started off in the ones that weren't too bright. But because, again, I was obviously advanced a lot more than these children, I was always coming top and getting prizes. So really it was a false thing because I'd been educated more than what they had. So then they put me in the top class. So, and then what we used to do every, I think, whether it was a week, couple of weeks, they used to have like a little test, was it mental arithmetic? And then you all sat in rows, like on a tier way. So the ones who came top, they would be in the first row, and then it would gradually go down. And so sometimes I'd be in the top row, then I'd sometimes be in the middle one. I was always I wasn't always in the top row. I was a bit of a mixture, to be honest. And from there, I then went to grammar school, and that was 5 years. That was in the City of London. Again, you used to have to travel by bus or trolley bus in those days they were. And again, I didn't like school, to be honest, because when you went to grammar school, generally everybody was bright. They were all bright children, and generally I was always in the bottom. I was always, when they used to call you out, they always started with the ones who came bottom, and my name was always the first one. But sometimes, you know, one year I came top in maths, and then another year it would be geography. I don't know whether it was the teachers that, you know, and you liked the teacher and you know, maybe took to them, whereas, and again, they were all boys, they were all men teachers, you didn't have any, and it was quite strict. You know, if you spoke while you were sitting in the classroom, you'd get a detention and, you know, 100 lines, or if the headmaster caught you, you'd get the cane. Oh, you know, it wasn't brutal, but, you know, I mean, I got the cane once, and at the time I never felt it was my fault. It's just the headmaster went by, the room was in a bit of an uproar because it was a teacher who didn't really control the children so well, and he just called out 2 boys, and I was one of them. But that was nothing to do with any of it. But, you know, so I stayed, say, 5 years at grammar school. I didn't get any O levels. You know, and when I tell people here, they said, you know, you went to grammar school, you must be bright, you know, you must be clever. I said, no, I didn't get any O levels. What, you went to grammar school, you didn't get any O levels? I said, no. But in a way, it didn't, but when I went to work, I liked work, I enjoyed it. And I started off, again, working in the city, because that's where I was near to, for a company called the General Electric Company, which at that time was, I think, one of the biggest companies in this country. It was huge, it was. I mean, this head office, there was 3,000 people working there. And they used to have to clock in every day with a thing, you know, ding, clock in. And I just started off as the office boy, running around, getting cups of tea for people. And then when, say, some of the boys, they get a better job in another company, they'd move off, and then you'd move on, you know, and that's how you sort of progressed, if you like. So I stayed there for about a couple of years, and I saw a job in the London Stock Exchange. So I thought, so I applied for that, because I did like maths, and I thought, I thought I was good at maths. I might not have been, but I thought I was. So, and it involved maths and this sort of thing. And again, I loved the job. Used to have to, things used to go in what they called a counting period. So every couple of weeks, you used to ring up other brokers to agree figures with them. So I used to ring up all these different companies, and I enjoyed that. And then that company got taken over. But I spent 5 years, say, in the stock exchange, working for different companies. Also at that time it was quite easy to get a job. So say you didn't get a rise, or you didn't feel the rise you got was, you know, adequate for what you felt you should get, you should just go and apply for another company somewhere else. So I did work for 3 or 4 different companies in the stock exchange. Then it got to the time I was going out with a young lady. I wasn't the sort that went with lots of ladies. I would, in my mind, I wanted to go with one lady or girl and get married, just one. I didn't want to go with lots of others. I just wanted one person. Unfortunately, I did meet a girl. We were going together for a couple of years. We, you know, talked about getting married. I expect I was about 18 then, and then suddenly she decided she didn't want me. So that was, to me it was devastating at the time, because I say I was just a one-man girl, and she was my first girlfriend, if you like. So after that I didn't go with girls for a while. I, you know, just kept to myself. And then I met another young lady. Again, she'd never been with a boy. So again, we were fairly similar, that we were, you know, not involved in boys and girls. And so we went out together for about 4 years actually. She didn't want to live in a flat, she wanted to have a house when we got married, which, fair enough. I think her sisters had lived in flats and there'd been, trouble with maybe the people downstairs and all this sort of thing. So my wife wanted a house, or my girlfriend or fiance, whatever you like to say in those days. So that's what we did. I had to earn a certain salary to get a mortgage, and I wasn't earning quite enough. So I went and said I wanted a rise. They said no. Right. So my father, who I say was still in the police, one of his fellow chaps he knew who was in the police had to retire through ill health, and he had this job in this company doing like figure work, but he didn't like it. So my dad told me, and he was going to leave. So I rang up the company and said, here you got a job going, I'd like to apply for it. I spent, I had the sort of cheek or whatever it word to do that, just ring up, I hear there's a job, I want to apply for it. And that's what I did. I applied for the job, they took me on, and I got this salary I wanted, which I can still remember the amount. It was £884 a year, and that's what I had to earn to get a mortgage. And I remember the chap who interviewed me, he was the company secretary, he said, "That's a funny old figure, why do you need that?" I said, "Because that's what the mortgage company want." And I started working there. Again, I loved it because it was figures, and it was only, doing the cash book. It wasn't anything really difficult. And after a few months, I think they gave people rises, and I got a rise. I'd only been there like 6 months, and I thought, oh, this is good, I've got a rise. I've only been here 6 months. And I stayed in that company for 20 years.
Wow.
And I gradually worked my way up. Always wanted to better myself, if you like. Somebody was maybe doing what we used to call the trial balance and those type of things. So I said, I'd like to learn that. I would, I'd have a go at that. And in the end, I became the accountant for the company. And even though I wasn't qualified, the chap who was the chairman, which I call was a bit like the old school, how people were. He told you what to do and you didn't talk back and all this sort of thing. But he was of the belief that if you could do the job, it didn't matter whether you were qualified or not. And I became the accountant for that company. And then about 20 years later, so I've been there 20 years, they started what I call the old people who'd been there when I first started to work were retiring, and they kept replacing them with qualified people. So he was getting all these qualified people in, but whether I don't know, maybe they didn't like it because I wasn't qualified, but I did know my job, I just knew it inside out, and they got rid of me. So then I was out of work. Well, no, I wasn't out of work, because obviously they had to give me 3 months notice, because I was like one of the senior staff, if you like. So I had to wait 3 months. So in that time I started to look around for a job, and I found a job in an insurance company as an accountant. And they must have had hundreds of applications for this job. And I got down to the last 2, and then in the end I got the job, and they said, I hope, you won't sort of join us and in a couple of months' time go off, because I'd taken a bit of a drop in my salary to get a job, really. And so I said, oh no, I wouldn't do that, no. And it was about Christmas time. So I started the job, and again I found it quite easy because it was similar to what I was doing. And I used to put like money on deposit with banks and that, but they were quite large, at that time we were dealing in say 20 million I know it doesn't sound a lot now, but those, it was 20 million was a lot of money. And I used to, ring up banks, put the money on deposit, and do all these sort of things, which was interesting. And this job was similar, not the amounts weren't as big, but it was still, putting money on deposits. And some of the things I'd learnt about how to get special clearance and on checks and things, I was able to use it for this company. And then the old auditors from my company where they got rid of me contacted me, and they said, we've got a company who's looking for an accountant and we think you might be ideal for the job. And I went for an interview, and in those days it was another 3,000 a year, which, so say I was earning 12, this was 15,000. And I thought, I can't, and I felt rotten that I said I was going to stay at this company for, I wasn't going to, but I thought I can't, not accept it. So I accepted that. So then I went to this thing, and I was like the company secretary as well, and the accountant. And again, it wasn't difficult. I didn't find it difficult, I must admit. But it was all like handwritten. You used to write it, add it all up, and But because I must say, I was very meticulous with figures. And that's one thing, it's like anything I do, it's always got to be straight, level, And so I stayed there for quite a few years, and then we were dealing in tin metal. And then what happened, there was a crisis in the London Metal Exchange with tin. I don't know whether somebody was trying to corner the market, and the company really went bust. So again, I had to start looking for another job. And I think I was out of work for about a year then.
Wow. But
in those days, the government helped you with your mortgage, because I had children then, they helped you, you got certain allowances and that. So then I got another job that was also into similar type of thing again, metal. That lasted a year, then that packed up. Then I worked for another metal broker, got back into the metal exchange, and they were called the Reuben brothers. They are still, I think they are the second or third richest men in this country. And all they'd come from Iran way back, and they used to do carpets. They sold carpets, and they got into this metal exchange, and he built this like huge company up. And you had to admire him, what he did. So I stayed there for about a year, and one of the directors, he wanted to start his own company up, and he asked me to go and work with him as the accountant. So then I did another job. So that was my life. And then in between, like I say, we managed to buy a house in where we thought, we'd never be able to afford a house, so we bought this house. And then from there, we then ended up buying a 4-bedroom detached house in Woodford.
Wow.
Which, say, recently we sold for just under 1.5 million.
What would you say throughout your life has been the biggest lesson that you've learned?
I've always accepted what somebody gives me a job to do, and I'll do it. I've not maybe wanted to be something, but I've ended up being something, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I know it's difficult to explain to me. I must say, I always try to be nice to people, always try and be kind.
If you could look back at your life and you could go back to any age or any year in your life, what would it be and why?
That's another difficult one. I mean, there could be so many.
Yeah.
What could I say? I did love work. Well, I used to be in the Scouts when I was young. I used to love that, Scouts. And I used to like singing. I used to be in a choir, the church choir.
Yeah.
And whether they're things that have shaped your life, I don't know. But I used to go to church not because of maybe your beliefs, but I like going and I like meeting people again.
Yeah.
I do like meeting people and talking. And I spent a couple of times I've sung, not me on my own, at St Paul's. A couple of times I've sung there. I went in the Scouts, became what they used to call a Queen, because a Queen Scout then. But I think scouting did teach me a lot. I was on a train once, and this train was packed, and they used to have guards vans, and it was all packed in this guards van. And this girl in front of me suddenly fainted, and straight away I had to help her.
Yeah.
So she sort of fell on the floor, and there I am down there. That's right, I got a lady to undo her top. And again, it's funny how your brain, I didn't undo her top. I automatically, don't ask me how or why, I said to this lady, do you mind, undoing her top for her? And then I was sort of like just blowing on her, and gradually she sort of came round. But everybody else, nobody does anything.
Didn't know what to do.
Yeah, so that was that. Well, then I had a girl on a train another time. She was sitting opposite me like you. Christmas time, suddenly she was sick, all on the floor. And nobody did anything. So I got her, went to the toilet with her, took her to the toilet. Again, I left the door open, put my foot so the door wasn't shut. Why? Again, I can't answer why I did that, but obviously something in me tells me not to shut the door, and then I sort of wetted her face and that and covered up. I think I got her some newspaper and just put it over where she'd been ill. And we sat down again on the train, but nobody else, I do find it odd, but...
So you would choose to go back to...
Maybe that time when I was, but not school, definitely.
So kind of when you were in Scouts?
Scouting,
kind of time.
church, choir and that sort of thing, yes.
Arguably the biggest question, what was the best day of your life?
I expect maybe getting married, I expect. Or even the children, when the children are born.
Yeah.
Not that, my wife didn't want me to be there at the birth or anything. Didn't. My wife was quite, what's the word?
Reserved?
She didn't, yes, you're right. Yeah, that's it, good word. She was very reserved. Yeah. But when I look back, I think maybe I was, again, whether I was the right person for her, because I didn't, because of her being reserved, maybe some men would have taken advantage, not because she's reserved, but because what a man maybe wants, a woman might not want. It's another difficult thing to... I've always had a lot of admiration for women, and that sounds funny again to say that, but I think women have a lot to put up with, when you think what they go through with pain and things like this. Yeah, and they're very hard working. I think of my mother, we'd all come home from work, we'd sit there, and it'd still be late, and there's your mum ironing, doing things, working, I think,
Yeah.
You have to think of that, your mum, think of your mum.
Yeah. When you were younger, what was your big dream? What was the aspiration for you? What did you want to achieve when you grew up?
I don't know, to be honest. I never thought about it.
Not really have any aspirations?
No. I did think I might follow my dad in the police, but I wasn't taught. Cause when my father was in the City of London Police, you had to be over 6 foot, and I didn't quite make it.
Oh.
And I went with my friend, because I had a friend, we were very close, a bit like brothers,
Yeah.
And we were in the Scouts together, we were in the choir together, and even now we still, see one another.
Oh.
And he came along, we both were going to join the police, he weighed enough, and you had all these things, you know. You had to be a certain weight. You couldn't wear glasses. You know, they were ever so strict on what the criteria was. So maybe, you know, I did think about going in the police.
Right, well, let's move to the present day. You're here living at Polliesfield. How long have you been living here?
Since March last year.
So March 2022.
Yeah.
And what made you move to this development? When you saw it, what drew you in?
That wasn't me, that was my daughter. She lives in, she's got a flat in Coggeshall. So I think she thought, oh, this is near to her. So that's how it started, I think. And we came and looked at it, and yeah, it's a brand new development. And I think, you know, she was thinking of me. She was thinking, like, maybe as I get older I might need help, you might need certain, which Pollyfields would offer.
Yeah. How do you find this type of living? Because within the development there's obviously a very big prominent assisted living that they provide.
You're right.
But then there is also a very, very prominent independent living scene with the social scene.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you find that type of living?
Yeah, no, to me, yeah, I mean, it does suit me what goes on.
And would you recommend this type of living and Polliesfield as a whole?
Yes, I think, you know, it's, you know, something you either like or not. The people, all the people here, I love the people, I do. Yeah. I love the people.
Love the social scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I do, I must admit that the ladies are lovely because, you know, they sit in their little groups and have their little chats. And then when I go down, I always go and talk to all the little ladies in their groups, but I won't actually sit down with them and join them to talk to, you know. I just, hello, you know, and then I'll go to the next lot.
So as always, the way I end every episode with every single one of my guests, what one piece of advice, Graham, would you give to the younger generations listening to the podcast at home?
Your parents, always listen to your parents. You know, they tell you things, but when you're young, you always think they don't know anything. But when it comes to your turn, you think, oh, that's what my dad used to say, or that's what my mum used to say. So maybe, you know, listening to your parents and that.
And there we have it, the end of the penultimate episode of the final series. Thank you, Graham, for sharing some of your amazing stories with us here on the podcast today. Now then, make sure you join me next week for the last episode ever of Through the Decades, and I am joined by such a truly inspirational guest. His name is James, and he talks to me all about his battle with cancer, as well as his life on a farm. That's all happening next week on the final episode of Through the Decades. I'd be honoured if you could join me. Other than that, all that's left for me to say is make sure to save, share the podcast on Spotify, Amazon Music or YouTube, and turn on the notifications to be notified of the last episode of the series, and I will see you next week.